Have you ever like looked at a painting and just thought, wow, how did they do that? How did they make it look so real?
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what we're gonna like dive into today. It's those techniques behind, creating art, especially with paint and like mixed media.
Huh.
Think of it like we're gonna unlock the secrets of year 4 art class.
Okay, I like it.
But you won't need crayons for this one.
Good, because I don't have any.
So our source material for this deep dive is this really cool document.
Okay.
And it outlines these like key concepts in art, like contrast, color mixing, and creating texture.
Yeah, the fundamentals.
Yeah, it's like a cheat sheet for understanding what makes art, tick.
Well, and what I think is really interesting is how this document frames these techniques. Like, it's not just about, step one, step two. It's almost like they're presenting it as solving a problem.
Okay, yeah.
For centuries, artists have had this problem of how do you create the illusion of depth and dimension on a flat surface?
Oh, that's a great point.
So all of these things are tools to solve that problem.
Yeah, it's like they had to invent a whole visual language to like trick our eyes.
Exactly.
And one of the first tools in that toolkit is contrast, right?
Absolutely. And the document really highlights this. You know how contrasting colors and textures, it's what grabs your attention and makes it visually interesting?
Okay, so it's not just about slapping on any random color. It's about being deliberate.
Right. It's about making choices that enhance those differences.
But how does that actually like translate into making something look three-dimensional on a flat canvas?
Well, let's take a simple example. Imagine a sphere.
Okay.
If you only used one shade of, say, red, it would just look like a flat circle on the canvas, right?
Yeah, it wouldn't have any depth.
But by adding tints and shades, lighter and darker versions of that red, you can start to mimic how light would actually hit a real sphere.
Oh, so you're like using those variations to create the illusion of light and shadow.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
artists even use what's called a value scale. It maps out this gradation from pure white to pure black.
So you can like plot out where each shade should go to make it look round.
You got it. You're basically sculpting with light and shadow instead of clay.
And I'm starting to see how those subtle variations, they really make all the difference.
Absolutely.
But the document also talks about like dabbing and stippling to create texture.
Yeah.
Now, to me, that sounds more about like how you apply the paint, not just the color itself. Am I on the right track there?
You are completely on the right track because those techniques really move beyond just color and into how the paint physically sits on the surface.
Okay.
Stippling, for example, it uses tiny little dots of color to build up an image.
Oh, I see.
It's like pointillism. Have you ever seen those paintings?
Yeah, like Seurat's A Sunday on Le Grand Jatte. Isn't that pointillism?
It is. It's amazing if you think about all that detail, all created from these meticulously placed dots of color.
Wow, that's mind-blowing. It's like a super high-resolution painting, but made with like the simplest of tools.
Exactly. And it really allows for incredible control over both color and texture.
But wouldn't that take forever?
Well, it certainly requires patience.
Okay, let's get to the heart of painting now. Shall we? Mixing colors?
Okay, let's do it.
I remember like learning the basics in school. Red and yellow make orange blue, and yellow make green, red and blue make purple.
Right, the primary colors.
But how do you get those nuanced shades? Like a deep teal or a fiery burnt orange?
Well, those basic combinations are your starting point.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Those are the basics. But then you start to play with those tints and shades.
Yeah.
Remember, adding white creates a tint, black, a shade,
Right.
and you can even thin the paint with water to get a more translucent wash effect.
Oh, I see. So it's about like experimenting and kind of finding those perfect combinations.
Precisely. It's all about experimentation.
It sounds like there's a whole language for talking about these color nuances.
There is. It's a very rich language.
And speaking of language, the document throws around some art terms like hue, tone, and proportion. Can you help us decode these a little?
Of course. So hue is simply referring to the pure form of a color, like a vibrant red or a sky blue. It's the color in its purest form. Tone refers to how light or dark something appears, which we've already kind of touched upon with tints and shades.
Right. Wait.
And proportion is about the size relationship between different elements in a piece. For example, if you're painting that bowl of fruit,
Okay.
the size of each apple in relation to the bowl itself and to the other pieces of fruit, that's proportion, and it really affects the balance and harmony of the whole composition.
So it's not just about making each individual object look realistic. It's also about how they all fit together in the bigger picture.
You got it.
This is starting to make a lot of sense.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
And speaking of like fitting things together in the big picture,
Yeah.
what about composition? Because the document talks about that too.
Composition is crucial. It's essentially how you arrange those elements within your artwork.
Right.
There are all sorts of techniques you can use, like the rule of thirds. Have you ever heard of that?
Maybe so.
You imagine dividing your canvas into thirds, both horizontally and vertically. And then you place key elements along those lines or at the intersections. It can make your composition much more dynamic.
Oh, so there's a method to the madness.
There is. There is a method to the madness.
It's not just random placement, there's intention behind it. It's fascinating how all of these concepts kind of come together to create a successful artwork.
It really is. It's a very deliberate process.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive.
Yeah.
You know, we've learned that contrast, color mixing, and understanding these art terms are kind of like the building blocks of painting.
I think that's a great way to put it.
But what's a takeaway for someone who's not necessarily aiming to be the next Picasso?
I think the key is to just start seeing the world through an artist's eyes. Pay attention to how light and shadow play on surfaces. Notice those subtle color variations in everyday objects. Think about how things are arranged in a scene. It can really enrich your appreciation for art.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. It's like looking at your morning coffee cup and thinking, how would I capture those warm tones and the smooth ceramic texture? Or walking through a park and seeing how the trees kind of naturally frame the landscape.
Right.
It's a whole new way of seeing the world.
It really is.
Well, sadly, that's all the time we have for this deep dive, but hopefully you're walking away with a fresh perspective on art and maybe even a little spark of creativity.
I hope so too.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you later.
Bye.